Our gospel lesson this morning comes from Matthew, and Jesus is speaking, offering up words of warning that we must watch, wait, and pay attention, for the day of the Lord is near. Hear these words. But about that day and hour no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. For as the days of Noah were, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day Noah entered the ark, and they knew nothing until the flood came and swept them all away, so too will become the Son of Man. Then two will be in the field. One will be taken, and one will be left. Two women will be grinding meal together. One will be taken, and one will be left. Keep awake, therefore, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But understand this. If the owner of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken in. Therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour. Please pray with me. Might words spoken and words heard, and the spaces in between, renew our hope for peace. Amen. If you go to the Lower East Side of New York City, you will see a sculpture there which was inspired by our reading from Isaiah. In the day of the Lord, says the prophet, they will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. The sculpture, reflecting those words, depicts a blacksmith hammering away at a sword, turning it into a plow, repurposing a weapon of war into a tool for peace. It is a vision sorely needed in our troubled world. The sculpture, of course, comes from our own time, but Isaiah's words were spoken almost 3,000 years ago, at a time when Israel, Jerusalem in particular, was threatened on all sides by the superpowers of the day. Isaiah's words were spoken to assure his listeners that ultimately, no matter how bleak things looked, and they looked very bleak, God's vision of peace would prevail. For God, Isaiah is saying, not the passing powers of history, is the true and final authority. It is a passage that calls on each generation, including ours, to live out of that hope. And while it often may seem like a futile dream, it is one that we can help make real if we allow God to work in and through us. As one scholar puts it, peace may not come even as we visualize it and hope for it, but it certainly will not come unless we imagine it, unless we believe and articulate the vision that God wills the end of war and conflict. I am not a fan of actor and director Mel Gibson, and I don't usually make a special effort to see movies about war. But when I heard the premise of Gibson's latest film, Hacksaw Ridge, I felt compelled to check it out. Set before and during World War II, Hacksaw Ridge tells the true story of Desmond Doss, a conscientious objector who served in the Army during that war. Doss was brought up in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. His father, a veteran of World War I, would probably be diagnosed today as suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. But back then he was simply one more fellow who had trouble adjusting to life after he had seen so many of his friends die brutal deaths in battle. His distress leads to excessive drinking and to domestic violence. The film very movingly depicts young Desmond and his brother Hal lying practically frozen in their beds, listening as their father screams at their mother in the next room and even hits her. Brought up by his mother as a Seventh-day Adventist, Doss is devoted to the church and to its pacifist views. His insistence on keeping the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," even extends to animals, and as a vegetarian, he refuses to eat meat. As an older teenager, Doss witnesses his drunken father threaten his mother with a gun. He wrestles it away from his dad. In a few tense moments, he points the gun right at his father's head. And tired of the ongoing violence in his home, he almost pulls the trigger. But he relents and slowly puts the gun down. And in that moment, that very moment, he makes a vow to God that he will never, ever touch a gun again. But then Pearl Harbor is attacked, and hell breaks loose. His brother enlists, as do most of the young men in his town, and Desmond feels a strong need to join them and to serve. But how do you serve in the military if you can't touch a gun? As a medic. So Desmond enlists and heads off for basic training. It is there that he encounters enormous resistance to his attempts to keep his vow. He is harassed by his sergeant, called a coward, and literally pushed around by members of his unit, even beaten up one night. But he persists. He wants to serve, but he will not touch a gun. His captain brings charges against him for insubordination, and he's court-martialed. But then, due to a turn of events I won't reveal in case you wish to see the movie yourself, he is found not guilty and allowed to stay in the Army and is deployed with his unit to the Pacific as an unarmed medic. Now, a warning. This is not a movie for the faint of heart or stomach. think Private Ryan. It is very graphic. And the climax of the film comes during a horrific battle on Okinawa, when the Allies are attempting to take a heavily guarded Japanese stronghold they call Hacksaw Ridge. First, they must use rope ladders to scale a death-defying cliff. And then they face dug-in opponents. The battle is long and gruesome. Artillery, flamethrowers, machine guns, rifles, grenades, all rain their hellfire and death on both sides. Finally, the order comes for an Allied withdrawal. But dozens of wounded men are left scattered across the field of battle. Those who survive hurry down the ropes. But Desmond, the man they called a coward, stays behind to care for the injured. And slowly, one wounded man at a time, he drags or carries each one he can reach to the rope ladders. And there, using a thick rope and a pulley, he lowers them to the ground. His hands get cut and torn from the constant friction of the rope. He himself is almost killed by a bayonet thrust through the dead body that he uses as cover when a soldier approaches. But still, he persists, muttering a prayer each time he returns from the ladder. Lord, help me to get just one more. Finally, the situation becomes totally untenable. The enemy is closing in on him closer and closer on every side. Bullets are flying everywhere. It's time for him to leave as well, but there is one more man to rescue, a far larger man than Doss. It is his sergeant, the man who had tormented him in basic training. The shooting gets closer and closer. He is so drained that he cannot even lift up the wounded comrade. Both their lives are in imminent and grave danger. Suddenly, Desmond reaches down and picks up the sergeant's rifle. Has he broken his vow? Is he finally going to fight back? But then he stoops down, picks up a blanket, and wraps it around the rifle to create a handhold so he can use the blanket as a stretcher to pull the sergeant to safety. He does. He doesn't use the rifle to kill his enemy. Rather, in a very literal way, he turns a weapon of death into a tool for life. He takes a sword and beats it into a plowshare. He takes a spear and transforms it into a pruning hook. And by the time it is over, Desmond Doss has single-handedly dragged, pulled, or carried 75 men, including at least 2 Japanese soldiers, to safety and a chance for life. While some in this room have served in the military and have seen such conflict in the past, most of us here today will never find ourselves in a situation like that faced by Desmond Doss in the days ahead. But still, most of us do know conflict. Most of us do face those times when our lives are anything but peaceful. But friends, these words from Isaiah, they can hold out hope for us personally as well. For though they were born out of international conflicts and wars, they can also be applied to the interpersonal conflicts that often cloud our lives. Ask yourself, brothers and sisters, ask yourselves, what are the swords and spears in my arsenal? What are the swords and spears in my arsenal? What are the weapons at my disposal? Do I ever have a sharp tongue? Am I known for cutting people to the quick with sarcastic witticisms? Do I always have critical remarks to offer when someone shares their hopes and dreams? Do I take pleasure in cutting them down to size? Do I have a killer stare that burns right through people when I'm angry? Do I use silence to punish others? Peace, you see, is not just about international diplomacy. In fact, at core, it is about interpersonal diplomacy. At core, it is about learning to respect other people, no matter how different they may be from yourself. It is about protecting the dignity of every single human being, even those who refuse to protect your dignity. There's the challenge. That's what Jesus means when he says, drag the Japanese soldiers to safety too. Think what a difference it would make in the lives of those around you if you went about the work of reshaping the swords and spears of criticism and conflict and turning them into plowshares and pruning hooks of love and respect. What if you repurposed them for peace? What if next time someone offered you an opinion that you felt was unfounded? What if you probed deeper instead of picking it apart? What if you asked them to explain their reasons for holding their position and really listened to their response instead of preparing your counterattack? What if you recognized that in doing so, you might actually learn something? What if the next time someone's views frighten you, you said so and admitted your fear? I'm scared to death by that idea. What if you said that instead of fighting back with accusations and bitter words? What if the next time someone tells you that they are frightened for themselves or worried about the future of our nation, what if you sought to learn more about their fears, to learn more with gentle words of affirmation instead of dismissive remarks? You'll be okay. I will continue to hope and pray and work for the day when we can literally beat our swords and spears into plowshares and pruning hooks. I will continue to work for the day when every nuclear weapon is dismantled and there is no more need for guns or bombs or tanks. I will continue to work for the time when we pour billions of dollars into cancer research and building homes for refugees and education educational opportunities for all instead of into defense. I will continue to do all of that in the name of peace. And though it may indeed feel like a distant dream, I urge you to join me in that task as well. But in the meantime, I implore you to find ever new ways to repurpose the swords and spears of conflict into tools for peace. I invite you to allow the one whose birth we are preparing to celebrate to work in your heart until you are able to set down the weapons of harsh words and spiteful attitudes and instead pick up the tools of love and respect and dignity. And finally, I invite you to join me in a simple prayer. Yes, dear Jesus, I ask for peace throughout the earth, across every border and line of division, across every land and around the globe. But, dear Jesus, let it begin with me.